Early regulation of AI companions needed to prevent addiction and exploitation. AI companions are rapidly evolving, offering human-like interactions that provide emotional support, entertainment, and companionship. However, their increasing presence in daily life raises psychological, ethical, and legal concerns, particularly regarding their influence on vulnerable users. The history of social media regulation delays serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of allowing engagement-driven technology to flourish unchecked. This paper argues that AI companions require proactive regulation to mitigate harm before their widespread adoption leads to dependency, deception, and ethical dilemmas similar to those seen with social media addiction. AI companions blur the lines between artificial and real relationships, fostering deep emotional attachments that can replace human connections. Their anthropomorphic design and artificial intimacy create parasocial relationships, making users feel emotionally dependent on AI-driven interactions. Platforms like Replika have drawn scrutiny for their engagement-driven design, which encourages long-term reliance and even distress when access is restricted. Beyond isolation, these bots also reshape social behavior, influencing how users perceive relationships and emotional support. Without clear guidelines, AI could exacerbate social withdrawal and emotional fragility, particularly among younger and more vulnerable users. The legal status of AI chatbots remains unclear, with major companies framing them as services rather than products to limit liability. This distinction affects consumer protections, making it harder to hold developers accountable for harmful interactions, deceptive advertising, or emotional manipulation. The FTC's investigation into Replika highlights the risk of exploitative design practices, where AI-generated interactions are engineered to elicit strong emotional responses. As AI grows more immersive, it raises the question of whether its regulation should follow the trajectory of social media governance, where delayed action led to widespread mental health concerns and addictive engagement loops. Governments and regulators are beginning to recognize the unique risks posed by AI companions, leading to new proposals for AI-specific laws. The FTC's Operation AI Comply is one of the first steps in holding AI developers accountable for deceptive marketing and engagement practices. Meanwhile, policymakers are considering age restrictions, with Australia's age verification model serving as a potential framework to prevent minors from developing emotional dependencies on AI chatbots. Additionally, there is growing interest in liability insurance models, where AI developers would be required to adhere to best practices to ensure ethical design and minimize harm. Without clear legal frameworks, AI companion companies will continue to operate in a regulatory gray area, leaving consumers vulnerable to manipulative AI-driven engagement models. AI chatbot developers argue that users have a First Amendment right to listen to AI-generated speech, complicating efforts to regulate their influence. This raises concerns about whether AI-generated content should be protected as free speech or regulated as a form of persuasive manipulation. Courts will likely have to balance freedom of expression with consumer protection, particularly when chatbots present themselves as human-like advisors or emotional support systems. One possible regulatory solution is transparency requirements, where AI companies would be obligated to clearly disclose when a user is interacting with an AI system, preventing deceptive or manipulative interactions. The slow response to social media regulation should serve as a warning for AI governance, as delayed intervention could lead to serious long-term consequences. Many experts advocate for early intervention in AI development, including the possibility of a temporary moratorium on AI companion technology until ethical guidelines are established. Without clear safeguards, AI companions could become an unchecked force, shaping human behavior in ways that regulators and society are not prepared for. Proposals for ethical AI design, liability frameworks, and transparency laws are gaining traction, but the challenge remains in implementing these measures before AI chatbots become as deeply embedded in daily life as social media platforms have. AI companions offer both immense potential and serious risks, making it imperative to establish clear regulations before they become a dominant force in digital interactions. By learning from past mistakes in social media governance, policymakers can proactively address AI-driven emotional manipulation, deceptive design, and liability concerns. Implementing age restrictions, transparency requirements, and ethical design principles will be essential to ensuring that AI companions enhance, rather than replace, human connection. Ultimately, the future of AI companionship will be shaped by the choices society makes now, determining whether these technologies serve as tools for emotional well-being or become another unchecked digital addiction.